Jesus resurrection mythology? Yeah, what's going on, party people in the place to be? I go by the name of the BK Apologist, transmitting all the way live. New York is the city, Brooklyn is the borough. What's good? What's popping? Hope everybody's having a good Wednesday. And of course, we gotta say what's up to the party people in the chat. We got Chris Gibson on the check-in. We got Revelator 007 building. We got Lou, big man Lou. What up, Lou? Um, of course, we have the real American Mr. Phil Fox in the building. Um, we have Deuce in the building. What's going on? You're new to the chat. Hope you stick around. And of course, as always, if you have not yet already, please like, share, and subscribe. Tell a friend to tell a friend that's him again. And if you like how it goes down at the BK, you can show your love via PayPal. Or if you like to be a monthly supporter of BK, you can become a patron. We get an assortment of goodies to enhance your personal Bible study. And we got the real Terry from Michigan. What's going on? What's going on? What up, though? You know what I mean? So, we are gathered here today. We've been summoned by the first person I'm going to introduce today. You know, we like to call him Dr. Doom, but you know, the thing that beneath his chin says apologist in Detroit. What's going on, sir?
Actually, the thing beneath my chin says that's what I do. I drink and I know things.
That's what I'm talking about.
Just like the Lord.
That's my type of shirt.
That's that's it. That's it. Hey, you know what? I saw this and I thought and this guy, you know, he put this out on Easter, you know, so he was like, "Happy Easter!" If you notice in the video, he's like, "Happy Easter, everyone!" And so I was like, "Oh, that's an interesting take." And then I was like, "Oh, wait a minute, this guy got 90,000 subs." I'm like, "Oh, there's people actually listening to him." And Matthew will tell you, like, I like to get bang for my buck. If I'm gonna spend a little energy responding to something, let's go for an audience, because you know, where we can actually help people, help a larger number of people. Right. So yeah, I saw this video, reached out, threw it in our little group chats, and reached out to a few of you guys, and thought, hey, let's do something about this, because this is one of the rare cases where someone is actually appealing to a scholar. Something that's usually absent from these people who are critiquing Christianity. So I thought that would be a great case for us to engage because of that.
And to help us with this case is Mr. Southern Hospitality himself, MJ Jackson. What's going on, sir?
What's good, fam? Yeah, Chris called me as soon as he saw this video, and he said, "Take a listen to it." And you know, I mean, the guy has a little bit of charisma, and he has a nice audience. It's like, why not? But as we'll get into in a minute, it's like it's nothing new, but okay, you got an audience, so we'll see what happens.
This is true. So before we even start, though, what I would like to say is it is always an honor and a privilege to be able to do stuff like this with you guys. You know, I respect and admire both you gentlemen, and I'm better just knowing you guys. I've learned so much from both of you, and I'm just humbled that I'm able to even be on a panel. Even though this is my channel, I'm humbled that you guys are even here to do this with me. So I just want to say thank you. I love you guys so much, and I just really appreciate what you guys have do for the Lord, but for me as well. So
ditto, you know, brother. Like I said, love you too, and always a pleasure when we can engage in these activities.
Right. Absolutely mutual, bro. Like you, I think that like it's probably common that all of us see each other in our bags, in our natural element, and think, man, that person know like 10 times as much as I know. And with all your slides and citations, you certainly, near the top of that list.
You too
Yes,
kind.
sir.
Thank you. Thank you. So before we even get to the video, I just want to share this real quick, right? The name of his video, Jesus Resurrection Mythology. Apologists won't tell you this. Off rip, he's fallacious. You know what I mean? And what fallacy? Hasty generalization. Not enough numbers on the field to represent the whole. Because for his statement to be true, guess how many apologists he has to know? All of them. Now, I know he's doing it for cap. I get it. It's YouTube. You want to be a little spicy. I get it. But if you're trying to formulate an argument against us and you name your video this way, I mean, we have to address it right off the rip like this. You're being fallacious. So,
yeah,
that's all.
I'd like to say that like it's supposed to be 5 of us. We're missing 2 right now. This is kind of like 3 of the Voltron lions going up against the roe beast. Although it's going to be one of those rare episodes where if the other 2 lions don't show up, we get the job done.
We get the job done.
Just have to put in that work.
That's right. We just won't be forming feet and legs and torso.
Well, we got that blazing sword, though.
Well, we got that blazing sword.
All right. Trust and believe. So we're going to fast forward, MJ. If you could go to the 1 minute, 27 second mark. Or you know what? Just start at the 1 minute mark. Just let it play from there.
A shizzle. All right. I'm getting ready to let it rip.
All right, go ahead.
And the whole line across the Roman Empire, doing it to Caesars, doing it to demigods, the mortals who become gods, the whole 9 yards. We get to Jesus, and what do academics who don't believe that Jesus rose from the dead do? They say that in the beginning of this whole thing, some misunderstanding, someone thought they saw the risen Lord, and this isn't out of the question as a possibility, of course, but all may have had a hallucination, or early Christians were so distraught over the death of Jesus that they started thinking they saw the Lord or experienced him after he died on the cross, and then began to pronounce, hey, I just experienced Jesus. He is risen. Then the legends and narratives tacked on to that. Now, while that's a plausible beginning.
So,
sorry.
And this is not his main argument, right? He starts with this, right? And he's talking about how if you are a scholar and don't believe in Christ, this is what you believe. Is that true, gentlemen? If you are a scholar that doesn't believe in Christ, is the default argument the mass hallucination theory?
No.
What is no Alex?
Right? Because he's starting with that's the default scholarly consensus or opinion of many, I should say. That they were so distraught, right? That the early Christians were so distraught over the death of Jesus, they started thinking they saw the Lord. They were so jacked up that they just, in their minds, started seeing him in real life.
Yeah, the quote unquote default non-believing, non-conservative position is I don't know. It's I don't know.
Right.
It's not to project hallucinations, because that's simply only hallucinations can account for all of the other data that you got to try to account for in terms of historiography. And so if you posit hallucinations, it's going to become radically ad hoc once you start accounting for other elements of the story of Jesus, such as his brothers, such as enemies, all those things. So what do you do with that? Posit another hypothesis. Well, you've already violated Occam's razor.
This is true. So I was looking at a article by Gary Habermas, one of the foremost scholars in the resurrection. And he has an article that's entitled Hallucination Theories to Explain Jesus' Resurrection. And he says a rare attempt suggesting that collective hallucinations are possible without any application to Jesus' resurrection is made by Leonard Zunin and Warren Jones. They point to phenomena such as claimed sightings of the Virgin Mary and other accompanying reports from groups of people. In cases like these, quote, expectation and, quote, emotional excitement are, quote, a prerequisite for collective hallucinations. In such groups, we see the, quote, emotional contagion that so often takes place in crowds moved by strong emotions. Zuni and Jones argue that expectation and emotional excitement are prerequisites before such group experiences will occur. In fact, expectation, quote, plays the coordinating role. But this scenario contradicts the emotional state of the early witnesses of Jesus' resurrection appearances. Even psychologically, the early believers were confronted face to face with the utter realism of the recent and unexpected death of their best friend, whom they had hoped would rescue Israel. As those recent events unfolded in the whirlwind of Jesus' physical beatings, crucifixion, and seeming abandonment, the normal response would be fear, disillusionment, and depression. To suppose that these believers would exhibit expectation and emotional excitement in the face of these stark circumstances would require of them responses that would scarcely be exhibited at a funeral. All indications are that Jesus' disciples would exhibit the very opposite emotions from Zunin and Jones convey after necessary requirements. So these guys, have done research on this thing called, the group hallucination phenomena. And what they saw is these things: excitement, emotional excitement, expectation. These are the things that are required, that coordinates with one another in order for this phenomenon to occur. And we see none of these things in the gospel accounts when it comes to the apostles. In fact, he says it himself, right? In this video, Mr. MythVision, they were distraught, right? It wasn't excitement, they were distraught. So it doesn't work in this case. Your thoughts, gentlemen?
Nah, I mean, sound like a snake oil salesman to me, man. I mean, we've heard this. We've heard this from Price. We've heard this from Carrier.
Well, let's not jump the gun because the people might not have seen the video. Let's not jump the gun because this ain't the main argument that he's proposing. This was like a little sidebar for him.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't want to get into my criteria just yet, but I mean, what he's proposing for us, without jumping the gun, is to, he hasn't presented any type of criteria that we can use, any criteria that we can lay on the table, any criteria that he's using, except we are the criteria is to try and see similarities and then go from there.
Right.
Or to look for quote unquote naturalistic explanations. But those naturalistic explanations presuppose something that needs to be explicitly stated as well.
Right.
Yeah, and I would say first of all, I think at like the 1 minute 28-second mark, he actually said that it's possible that the resurrection actually took place. He was kind of like running through some of the theories of it. So I appreciate the fact that he at least is acknowledged that, because a lot of skeptics won't even go that far. So that, and in light of that, people who are considering the merits of what he's gonna go on to say and what we're gonna kind of counter with tonight, just know he already has acknowledged that it's possible. That's one. And then speaking of possible, I think that when he's appealing to this delusional theory, there's possibility and plausibility. And as BK has just pointed out by some academics, the plausibility is not very likely, even though it's possible. It's not very plausible. So so far, I think that's a strike in the side of what he's advocating for. But again, this is kind of, he offers an accumulative case, and we're going to give an accumulative response. You get an opportunity to kind of weigh out the merits for yourself.
Exactly. So let's continue. You can just continue playing.
What I find quite powerful about Richard's work is he takes the existing legend, the existing content that Christianity has, and the earliest apologists, how they were used to convince.
Can you rewind that a little bit?
About Jesus.
Why is it chopping
and how
up
this
like
is the one religion that's true.
What was that?
Big up to Bodega Lady Dana. What's going on?
So why is it breaking up like that?
Said it's breaking up on y'all's end.
Yeah, it's breaking up on our end.
Yeah.
It's real choppy.
Just rewind it a little bit and then play it again.
All right.
Just a few seconds.
All right.
And how they were using it in trying to convince the Greek and Roman world about Jesus and how this is the one religion that's true. They used the same constructs. So that being said, I want you to pay attention. He's saying turtles all the way down. We have legend that is already a model in which people are using within the Greek and Roman world and the Jewish world at that. But these are Hellenistic Jews. These are not your typical, what we imagine in Orthodox Judaism or anachronistically trying to understand what a Jew would be. These are people who are living in a Greek-speaking Greek culture.
Okay, because he makes a very in his accumulative case, he just made a comment that I think is relevant for this discussion. He claims that part of the reason that this theory is more plausible is because it's Hellenistic Jews that we're talking about. And the author of the book, because I was kind of reading it a little bit earlier, he got that from him, because that's basically, he said that, hey, this makes most sense if we're thinking about Hellenistic Jews who are in a sense already open to Hellenization because they kind of live out in the diaspora, and that's kind of this natural. And he acknowledges, there's still a tension because Jews see themselves as distinctly different, and Romans see them as different than them. But he's saying that, hey, they're already kind of desensitized to some degree in participating in Hellenization. I want to object to that, because most of who he's going to critique is going to be the Apostle Paul. And in Scripture, the Apostle Paul doesn't view himself as a highly Hellenized Jew. He views himself as a Hebrew of Hebrews. He views himself as a very devout Hebrew that does not take his tradition of Judaism lightly. And that's the very grounds on which Paul says that you should believe whatever I'm telling you about this Jesus guy, you should believe, because I'm not a person who takes these things lightly. So I wanted to cite that real quick. And this is in Philippians chapter 3. Philippians chapter 3, starting at verse 4. I'm going to start halfway through verse 4. It says, if someone else thinks they have reason to put confidence in their flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, in regard to the law, a Pharisee, as for zeal, persecuting the church, as for righteousness based on the law, faultless. So the premise of both the author of the book, whose name is escaping me right now, as well as the myth guy right here, I think that because they mention this as a fundamental part of their case, I think that the burden of proof is on them to show how Paul, who self-identifies as a very devout Jew, a very devout person who practiced Judaism, doesn't take the things that he says that might differ from traditional Judaism lightly. I think the burden of proof is on them to show how Paul's Hellenization in particular grounds this, because again, that's who they're critiquing.
Right. Also, he makes mention of the development of the legend. Now, historically speaking, how long does something take to become legendary? What, 50, 100 years? Give or take, right? But we know that one of the earliest creeds in the Bible, which is in Corinthians, people like Gould Luderman, who is an atheist, biblical scholar, says that creed was crystallized within 8 to 12 months from the crucifixion. There's not enough time for any kind of embellishment or legendary phenomenon to occur. So there is no legend here, and from a historian perspective. So he's off in that as well. So, MJ.
Yeah, let me read something because the legend hypothesis, and this is what he's proposing, is that it's a legendary hypothesis. One of the major problems with the legend hypothesis, which almost he's not going to address it, is that what you said just a second ago, that the time gap between Jesus' life and death and the writing of the Gospels is just too short. And I'm talking about the Gospels. And, you know, the creed in 1 Corinthians 15 is even earlier than the Gospels.
Right.
But check out what A.N. Sherwin White, in his book, Roman Society and Roman Law in the New Testament. Professor Sherwin White, he's not a theologian. He's a professional Greco-Roman historian of times prior and contemporaneous with Jesus. According to Sherwin White, the sources for Roman and Greek history are usually biased and remove 1 or 2 generations or centuries from the events they record. Yet he says historians reconstruct with confidence the course of Roman and Greek history. For example, he says the 2 earliest biographies of Alexander the Great were written by Arrian and Plutarch more than 400 years after Alexander's death, and yet classical historians still consider them to be trustworthy. The fabulous legends about Alexander the Great did not develop until centuries after these 2 writers. He goes to say, according to Sherwin White, the writings of Herodotus enable us to determine the rate which legends accumulate, and the tests show that even 2 generations is too short a time span to allow legendary tendencies to wipe out the hard core of historical facts.
Wow.
And so you got the creed in 1 Corinthians 15. What was that? 5 years? Within 5 years?
Less
than 5 years. That's a lot of information. And so it's just not enough time for legend to get going. So already right off the bat, his hypothesis is having issues, not to mention that it's anti-Semitic.
Nice. And we still haven't got to his main argument, ladies and gentlemen. That's the crazy thing. We're still not there yet, but we're getting there. We're getting there. Go ahead, MJ.
All right.
World. And so these are not your strictest, most staunch, what we think of as Jews. So when they talk about Jesus' resurrection, even as early as Paul, we need to imagine already legend and a topos tradition of something like that happening. So I prefer to consider what Dr. Richard Simler is saying today. And I hope you will pay attention as well. You know, we're all familiar with modern Christian apologists. Apologists are self-designated defenders of Christian belief and teachings. Were you aware, however, that the earliest Christians had their own defenders or apologists of earliest Christian belief and practice? I mean, you may notice that the modern apologist makes no or at best, highly selective use of the arguments of the ancient predecessors. In fact, most assume that the truth was revealed with Jesus and his closest pupils, and then immediately lost for the better part of 2 millennia, only to be recovered by Protestant pastors and theologians in the last 2 centuries. We only need to spend 5 minutes reading any of those ancient arguments to recognize that modern apologists are in wild disagreement with the surviving earliest Christian apologists. Consider this somber example.
Again, hasty generalization. We all are ditching the previous generations of apologists. We don't associate with them. We don't recognize any of them, right? All of us do that, right? All of us. Crazy. Anyway, continue.
Hold up. Before you go on with that, because I have something pulled up for that. Okay, this is because I was actually looking for my copy of "I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist" because I thought about this, and so this is okay. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. This has to be like 15, maybe 20 years old, right?
It's
20 years
been,
old. So
yeah, it's been out
it's
there.
been around for a minute, right? So this is within the I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. I want to show you. See those names right there, and see those dates. These are like, oh, wait a minute. There we go. You see that? Oh, who's that right there? Who's that? That's who he's about to talk about, Justin Martyr. So while he claims that apologists are selective or don't at all mention one of the most popular Christian apologetics books of like the last 30 years, I mean, is mentions a ton of early church fathers apologists. So, I'm not sure in his broad generalization that he's using to frame his paradigm, his narrative. I feel like it's uninformed on significant areas that are important for the foundation of what he's arguing for. And so, yeah, just pointing it out. Just one book came to mind, and I could probably go and find more apologetics books where they're citing early church fathers and early
I
apologists.
guess we're supposed to start every YouTube video with an ode to Justin Martyr, I guess, so that maybe then we'll properly be using them.
We're gonna talk a little, just tiny bit about Justin Martyr today. Not a whole lot, just a tiny bit about Justin Martyr.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, bro. Yeah, MJ.
Example. One that our guest, Dr. Richard C. Miller, will be unpacking in a soon-to-come episode right here. That's right, right here on MythVision. Coming from 1 Apology 21. The earliest and greatest of these ancient apologists, a Samaritan, born and raised in the 1st century in Neapolis at the foot of Mount Gerizim. Being a contemporary, had a front row seat to the production and earliest circulation of the documents that we later find in the New Testament.
Can an 8,000-year-old herb really increase?
Sorry. I got to pay my YouTube premium. Let me see if I can fast forward through this. I'm sorry, y'all.
Well, what? Okay, fine. Yeah.
Justin Martyr composed his apology in the latter first half of the 2nd century. Here is his best and only defense of the resurrection and ascension narratives. When we, the apostles, New Testament writers, early evangelists, etc., affirm that the Logos, God's firstborn begotten without a sexual union, namely our teacher Jesus Christ, was crucified, died, and rose, and ascended to heaven, we are conveying nothing new with respect to those whom you call sons of Zeus. Here, Justin continues by showing the same recognized patterns in examples taken from the classical demigod tradition. Hermes, the interpreting word and teacher of all. Asclepius, who though he was a great healer, was struck by a thunderbolt and so ascended to heaven. And Dionysus too, after he had been torn limb from limb. And Heracles, once he had committed himself to the flames to escape his toils. And the sons of Leda, and the Dioscuri, and Perseus, son of Danae, and Bellerophon, who though sprung from mortals, rose to heaven on the horse of Pegasus. For what shall we say of Ariadne, and those like her who have been declared to be set among the stars? Ultimately, Justin draws strong ties to the Roman apotheosis tradition, including the well-known tradition of the eyewitness to the raised emperor. Justin continues, notice the oath involved in the cultic consecration. Justin says, and what about the emperors who die among you, whom you deem worthy to be forever immortalized, and for whom you bring forward someone who swears to have seen Caesar, once having been consumed by fire, ascend into heaven from the funeral pyre.
You want to start there?
Think about this. Who else?
All right. So, like Chris said earlier, so he sends his video to us, right? And this guy, he has a sizable audience. I've seen him on other people's channels. So I'm thinking, okay, this guy's going to give us, a pretty robust and compelling argument against the resurrection. But what he actually does is once again regurgitate zeitgeist talking points. I'm like, Chris, what do you got me watching? Like this has been debunked so many times. I mean, zeitgeist came out when? 2010? And it's like, now the credit I'll give him is that he actually quotes more of the quote. It's still a misquote, but he quotes more of it than usual mythicism.
Get him.
But we're still doing this. It's 2023 and we're still doing this. Like, gentlemen, what's going on here?
I think we also got to understand the context in which Justin Martyr is writing.
Right.
I mean, there's a reason he's not saying that Jesus is a myth. Justin Martyr is calling out hypocrisy. And this is what happens when you try to abstract information for your own use and separate it from the historical context. We see this in politics. I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King, and now we're seeing it right here with what he's trying to do to Justin Martyr.
Yeah, and I think that we often lose sight of the context of these types of things. So he's appealing to Justin Martyr as though Justin Martyr was actually a contemporary, when in reality Justin Martyr is 100 years after the fact. I mean, 100 years ago in America, none of us three here, or the two missing would be who we are today. It's more than likely that the present oppression that was present at that period of time would at the very least limited the potential, our potential, if not outright, us being demised. You know what I'm saying? Because that was that world 100 years ago, and there was the assumption is from the time of Justin Martyr, from the time of Jesus to the time of Justin Martyr, that the world was relatively the same. The way that people thought, the way that people believed and interacted with the world, it was very relatively the same. Another problem with appealing to Justin Martyr is he's superseding, he's disparaging actually Paul, while he's uplifting Justin Martyr, who he thinks grounds his position. The problem is this: the Apostle Paul was actually a contemporary of these events, and the Apostle Paul. So we have to, if we're going to weigh the words of the two, are we going to lean more to the actual eyewitness of the events, or are we going to lean more to a person 100 years later who has an opinion on it? Another challenge is this: the scriptures, whatever he believes about the scriptures, because I wasn't quite clear on that based on this little short video that we are kind of responding to. You have to acknowledge that the scriptures, particularly the book of Acts, among all of the books of the New Testament, but Acts in particular, has a long list. A lot of research has been done on the facts that you can measure, that you can go back and locate things. Like the book of Acts is used by archaeologists to locate cities, to locate artifacts, and to validate the existence of peoples and cultures. So something about the book of Acts is grounded in reality. Secondly, some things are like people. For instance, if you go to Acts chapter 18, where Paul is actually in Corinth, which is he's alluding to Paul's statements in Corinth, which we'll talk about in a moment. There's a guy that's mentioned there because Paul goes to Corinth. he impacts the local economics, people who are making money. Some of them drag him into, some Jews, that was Ephesus. Some Jews drag him into courts over religious differences, and they go before a Roman governor named Gallio. We know exactly who Gallio was because he was a member of a famous family. If you've ever heard of the philosopher Seneca, that was his big brother. Where Seneca the elder was his father, Seneca the younger was his big brother. Seneca was the guy who tutored Nero, the emperor, would be the emperor, one of the emperors, right? And while Nero became emperor when he was young, so Seneca actually, in a sense, ruled. If you watch, Game of Thrones, think Lord Varys. He's a guy that's got some wisdom and kind of manipulates and massages things to get the job done, right? So Seneca's a real guy. Gallio's a real guy. We know the precise window in which Gallio ruled as a governor in Acacia in the province of where the province of Corinth is, where he was the judge. So how would this author get those types of details correct? I would also point to you to say the earliest text of the book of Acts is a contemporary for Justin Martyr, but it's citations of the book of Acts, small quotes that precede it. So we know that the book of Acts, even though the oldest surviving manuscript is around the same time, mid second to early third century as Justin Martyr lived, we know that the book was written before then because quotes can't exist from a book that doesn't exist. You know what I'm saying? So the book of Acts clearly preceded these, and it got these facts correct. And we know the exact window, 51, 52, when Gallio was the governor of Corinthians. So when we can say that there's definitely some realness to the book of Acts. It's not simply myth. They're not simply, going around talking about myth and using this myth to tell a historical fiction. They're actually telling real facts, stories by real facts. So when we get to now getting to 1 Corinthians, because 1 Corinthians is kind of the foundational text in which he's taken exception with. It's like Justin Martyr, 130 years later, Justin Martyr, is saying 100 to 130 years later, is saying that, or at least that part of the quote that he's quoting is saying like, oh, he's like these demigods, right? And, they have similar elements in their stories, and Jesus is like that. The problem is the Apostle Paul, in the very citation that we're discussing, says literally that if Jesus have not raised from the dead, then our hope is in vain, and we are to be pitied. And if our hope of being resurrected one day, which is based on Jesus' literal resurrection from the dead, it is not true, then we should be pitied more than anybody else. Paul doesn't seem to be espousing some mythological resurrection. Right. He seems to be squarely arguing for a literal resurrection. So even if there are contemporary resurrection accounts that are laced in mythological stories of mythological characters that are contemporary to Jesus, maybe that's why Paul is making this distinction that he's talking about something different. He's not talking about the same thing. And again, Paul, the contemporary of Jesus and the apostles, Justin Martyr, a guy 100 years later, with who knows how much, cultural perspective and differences in the way that they see the world. And that's without even getting into the reality that the New Testament is not simply advocating, giving you this mythological story. It's based on the story of the Old Testament, and it's not simply about Jesus. It's about a king and his kingdom, and there's a whole lot of other worldview and values associated with it. And so while you're arguing against this piece that you might think of as mythical, you're dismissing without even considering all the other elements of the paradigm of Christianity as a whole, which people literally was changing the way that they live their lives in light of. So I think that the burden of proof, again, is on you. It's on you guys to show why it makes more sense to listen to a guy 100 years later versus a guy who's actually an eyewitness and contemporary of the actual events, who actually says that, hey, this ain't like a myth. I'm telling y'all this real, and it's so real that we wasting our time if it ain't real. So yeah.
Let me add something to that, Alfredo, real quick.
Go for it.
With Acts. So not only do you have, and a lot of historians point out the superior work of Luke, in both Luke and Luke Acts. I mean, I guess it's a 2-part work.
Mm-hmm.
But within Luke and Acts, you have these speeches. And these speeches have what historians point out to be Aramaisms, right? These Aramaic sayings where it doesn't even make sense unless you back translate it in Aramaic, such as the sermons and all these types of things. And that also just points out to the fact that Luke was drawing on an oral tradition for his source material. Now, there is a certain perspective within Western culture that unless something is written down, it's just not knowledge. It's just not historical. It's just not factual unless it's written down. And on me and Chris kind of pointed that out in our on a video on my channel. Some of these Western tendencies, but see, when you're dealing with the biblical material, you cannot force it into a Western paradigm. Otherwise, whatever hypothesis that you propose is not going to be able to account for the Jewishness of Jesus. It's not going to be able to account for the Old Testament virtues. You can sit there and say all day, you can talk about the Hellenization, but in Galatians, which most scholars hold to be a legitimate writing of Paul, you got two factions of Jew. You have a very Jewish faction that Paul is calling Peter out over. With these men from James that came up. These are real Jews that are coming up, and they had their own customs and ways. And Paul is calling Peter out. And guess what? When we talk about the criterion of historicity, the criterion of authenticity, there's a certain criterion called the criterion of embarrassment, and that's one that lets you know that it's historical.
Right. That's good. And to your point, your earlier point about, well, this is a guy that comes 100 years later, but even with that, you still have to quote him in his proper context, right? And that's what you was alluding to earlier, MJ. So with that being said, this is from Survey of Jesus Mythicism, New Paradigm or Old Pseudo Scholarship, a Christian response to Jesus Mythicism, Book 1, Albert McHenry. He says, however, by far the most misused quotations are taken from Justin Martyr's first apology. Mythicists often use a few isolated quotes and claim that Justin was defending Christians against charges of plagiarism and used the excuse that Satan mimicked Christ in anticipation of Jesus as the reason for the parallels. This would come as a surprise to those who actually take the time to read the first apology. When one takes the time to read the text in full, Justin's purposes and actual argument is quite clear. The purpose of the first apology was nothing to do with pagan parallels or even proving the truth of Christianity. Justin is actually attempting to appeal to the educated Roman elite that the persecution of the Christians is unfair and that Christians pose no threat to Roman civil order. The statement of the form, quote, when we say about Jesus is no different than what you say about one of your gods, it is not claiming any direct parallels, but rather points out the hypocrisy in claiming the Christians were blasphemous for what they believe, when this would make their own beliefs blasphemous as well. For example, he states this about Jesus being crucified, but none of the gods he mentions for the pagan correspondents were ever said to be crucified. He actually pointing out the Christians were criticized for worshiping a crucified God when they worship a God ripped to pieces by wild animals, Dionysus, or face some other humiliation. In fact, he makes the differences in their deaths quite clear when he follows the point by stating, quote, for their sufferings at death are recorded to have been not at all alike, but diverse, so that not even by the peculiarity of his sufferings does he seem to be inferior to them, but on the contrary, as we promised in the preceding part of this discourse, we will now prove him superior, or rather have already proved him to be so, for the superior is revealed by his actions. So that's the point of the apology. It's like, you want to, basically, you're saying we're spooky, you're just as spooky as we are. But he's not saying we're the same type of spooky. He's saying you're a hypocrite because you're talking about us, but look at your guys. They're doing all sorts of stuff too. So if you're gonna get at me, keep that same energy. This is the first case of keep that same energy argument right here.
Right.
All right. So
yeah, and I hate to even follow that up because that was such a powerful point that needs to sink in. People really need to grasp that. You know, they are using Justin Martyr in a way that Justin Martyr wasn't actually speaking. And so what they're doing effectively is twisting Justin Martyr's words, or they're building an argument on the premise that Justin Martyr is saying they're similar. Therefore, when in reality, Justin Martyr is not saying they're similar in the way they are. He's saying they're similar in a different way, and in a way that's most unique. Jesus is different. But that aside, another biblical case for the resurrection comes in along also on Paul's missionary journey when he's in Athens in Acts chapter 17, and when he quotes unique in this particular case, Paul is contextualizing in the Greco philosophical in their way of speaking. You know, hey, I saw you got this statue to an unknown God. Let me tell you who this guy is. The unknown God is, right? Quotes their philosophies. He doesn't quote any scripture at all in this particular passage. But when he comes to the culmination of his oration presentation, he tells them that because that God is going to judge, that this unknown God is going to judge everybody, and he's proven this by sending his son and raising him from the dead. And at this, the philosophers, this culture of affluent philosophical thinking, the people of their day are snarled. It says they snarled at the notion of a resurrection. So here's the point: if this is nothing new, if this is what these Greco-Roman people already believe and accept, and if, as Justin Martyr is saying, Paul is not saying anything different, then why are the people actually of their day, the people who are the very type of people that he would be appealing to, why are they taking exception and snarling at the very thing that Paul is saying? If that's something common that everybody believed and accepted.
I was going to bring this up later, but since you brought up now, we might as well go for it. Acts 17, starting in verse 18, some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him, and some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities." Foreign divinities. Because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, I always messed it up, saying, "May we know what this new teaching that you are presenting? For you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean." He's talking to the elites, right? The philosophers of the Greco-Roman world. And they hearing Paul speak, and they're not saying, as what Apologist Detroit said, "Yeah, that sounds real familiar. Yeah, same old saying."
Sound like Dionysus to me.
No, they're like, this is foreign to us. This is a new teaching, right? In Acts 17:28, as Paul continues from there, he says, "For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring."
He must be saying the same thing that they're saying, because he just said, "It's just like you."
He's quoting Epimenides, right? He says, quote, "For in him we live and move and have our being was written by Epimenides in arguing for the eternal Zeus against other Cretan philosophers who seemed to be arguing that the Greek god was dead. Right? It says, they fashion a tomb for you, holy and high one, Cretans, always liars, evil beasts, idle bellies, but you are not dead. You live and abide forever, for in you we live and move and have our being. Right? Another person that Paul's quoting when he says some of your own poets is Aratus in his Phenomena 1-5. It says, let us begin with Zeus, whom we mortals never leave unspoken, for every street, every marketplace is full of Zeus. Even the sea and the harbor are full of this deity. Everywhere, everyone is indebted to Zeus, for we are indeed his offspring. And again, to Apologist's point, this entire dialogue, this monologue that Paul's having, there's no Torah, there's no Tanakh, there's not one thus saith the Lord. But they understand that through his argumentation, by using their material, they're not confused in thinking that he's saying, yeah, we're just like Zeus. They know that, okay, you're teaching something different. But they understand what he's teaching. Why? Because he's contextualizing the gospel via their own literature. But they're not confused. They fully understand, all right, this is weird. Yeah, we know Epimenides. Yeah, we know Aratus. That's our peoples, right? You're quoting. We're tracking with you. We know what you're trying to say. But what you're trying to say is foreign to us. So this is actually a case study that defeats his entire argument. We didn't have to do anything else. All we had to do was go to Acts 17. Honestly, to defeat the whole thing. Go ahead.
Which again is about 100 years before Justin Martyr, if you're keeping track of that. And from an actual contemporary of the Gospels of Jesus, the Gospels, and author of the majority of the New Testament. So this is who we're talking about. We're not talking about a person that we're not even talking about a person that we have to widely speculate much about, because a lot of the very claims, the seminal claim that your principle that you claim that this is based upon is the Hellenization of Jews, where, as we've already pointed out, Paul doesn't see himself as a Hellenized Jew. Yeah, he's a highly educated Jew, as you just saw. He's a very educated Jew. He's not a Hellenized Jew. He's doing what seemingly all New Testament authors did, contextualize. If you just go back to the four Gospels, which they talk about in his book, the author's book also, the four Gospels, one is contextualized for the Jews of their day. Another is contextualized for Gentiles. Another is contextualized for aristocrats. So they're speaking to different people of different, social standing and mindset, because they want to reach all of these people. Just like Paul here is speaking to these philosophers, he's speaking their language. So it's not, I don't think it's even as simple of a task as they might necessarily think when they see these elements of these other cultures, to assume that it's appropriation of these, or to assume that it's what's the word when you mix religions together? I'm sorry.
Syncretism.
Syncretism, right. To assume that it's syncretism. It's not syncretism. The authors in this particular case is distinctly telling you, I'm not syncretizing. He's contextualizing, not syncretizing. Yeah.
Right. So with that, let's fast forward a little bit to the 8-minute, 33-second mark, if you will, MJ. Oh, that's fine.
In a few weeks, I shall bring Dr. Miller on the show to help us unpack this and related texts. The earliest Christians, according to Miller, never did prop up anything like a historical case for Jesus' empty tomb, appearance, or ascension narratives in the New Testament. That was not the purpose or function of such tales. So what is the New Testament? What is going on with the Gospels? What kind of genre are they? Are they some mythoi? Are they a mythological fictional narrative surrounding some guy named Jesus? And right out the gate in Paul, he is already loaded with language that is full of what we like to call theology, but I would almost say mythical teaching. He has a Son of God who is seated at the right hand in heaven, who already has overcome death and all these things. Read all of those other Greek and Roman tells, and they also overcome. They also ascend. They also do the same things. It's literally walking like a duck, talking like a duck. And then we get to Paul and we think, no, this is real. Like he really thinks that this is something really authentically true. But if we read the same thing about those who swear consecrated to the Roman imperial cult and those who had apotheosis on the Caesar side that Justin Martyr mentions, or those who are deified mortals or gods who become more than what they were before, etc. Like all of these stories, we see stuff that we find in Jesus's narrative, but we're believing this fiction to be true. And that goes for the Christian.
Well, of course, he's begging the question, right?
Because absolutely.
You would have to prove that it is not true, right? But that's a whole different video. But so nobody in the New Testament is making an historical claim about Jesus? Is that what he's saying? Is that what he's saying? So, well, we don't have to speculate that, right? Because the Bible actually says what they think, right?
Once again,
MJ, can you read this for us, please? That's on the screen.
Yes, for we did not follow cleverly devised myths.
What was that again?
Cleverly devised myths.
Oh.
When we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. That's the Messiah. But we were eyewitnesses.
They were what?
Eyewitnesses of his majesty. For when he received honor and glory from God the Father, and the voice was borne to him by the majestic glory, this is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. We ourselves heard this
They
voice.
did what?
They heard.
They heard. Okay.
This voice, born from heaven, for we were with him on the holy mountain. And that's multiple attestation right there for you.
I mean, like, we don't think it's a myth. You know why we don't think it's a myth? Because we was there. We saw it. We heard it. I was next to Duke. I was on his left side, like when this was going down. Like, I'm here. I was outside with this dude. MJ, 1 John, please.
That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon, which we have touched with our hands, concerning the word of life. That's empiricism right there, baby.
So, but now he's saying that, well, they did the same thing with the empress. Fine. You get your data, we get ours. Let's see whose guy is real or not. Let's do that. You know what I mean? Let's do that.
Yeah, let's lay out some criteria too to vet this stuff.
Because the academic consensus says this dude existed.
Yep.
And just in case if you're curious like me, like that was First Peter, that was Second Peter, right?
That was
first, right?
Second Peter.
Yeah, Second Peter. I think Second Peter is one of the New Testament books that's dated on the earlier side in text, internal. You know how they got a full matrix of ways that they date. You know, the language that it's in, the type of style of writing that it is. It's much different. But anyway, short version is it's dated on the early side. Plenty scholars dated as early as 60 AD. Average dating is about 80 to 90 AD. Both of which is quite a bit of time before, once again, Justin Martyr. So this notion of the New Testament Christians believing that they're not telling some fable according to their writings, the dating of them establishes this well before Justin Martyr. That's what's going on here. So, yeah.
Now he also says, right, that he keeps bringing up how it's just so similar to the Greco-Roman mythos, right? Okay, let's just take one for instance. we're going to go to the Encyclopedia of Greco-Roman Mythology, Mike Dixon Kennedy, right? Let's just look at one, right? Zeus. Since Paul quotes Zeus in Acts 17, right? Let's see how similar this dude is to Jesus. On Crete, Zeus was a young god, the consort of the dominant mother goddess, though the more usual legend makes him the younger son of Kronos and Rhea. He was replaced with a stone wrapped in swaddling when his father sought to swallow him, as he had his other children. Rhea, at least according to Minoan tradition on Crete, hid the baby Zeus in the Dictaean cave, where her priests, the Curetes, clashed their weapons together in order to drown the baby's cries, while the she-goat, Amathea, acted as his nurse. Just like Jesus, right, guys? Reigning supreme in heaven, Zeus first married Metis, an Oceanid, the daughter of Oceanos and Tethys. However, while she was pregnant with Aphne, an oracle foretold that any son born to Metis would be greater than his father. Mindful of how he had overthrown his own father, Zeus swallowed Metis. Sometime later, he was walking on the shores of Lake Triton when he suffered an agonizing headache. Realizing the cause of the pain, Hermes persuaded either Hephaestus or Prometheus to cleave open Zeus's skull. From the wound sprang the fully grown and fully armed Athene. This guy's saying that, yeah, what Paul is trying to establish is quite similar to stuff like Zeus. Really? Gentlemen.
I mean, this is laughable because once again, you have to ignore large amounts of data. Not to mention, like, I guess Jesus Christ is just his last name. No, Christ has Jewish connotations. That means king. That means Messiah. There were certain beliefs going around amongst the Jews about the Messiah, which is why when Jesus first stood up and read his manifesto in Luke 4, there were certain things that went along with that was to be expected amongst the Jews. And so we cannot divorce Jesus from his Jewish context, and that's why the mythicists always get it wrong, because they insist on attempting to place Jesus in a Greco-Roman mythos rather than understanding that Jesus is best seen by, with the backdrop of first century Judaism.
Right. And they always try to find one or two things that have some similarity. Well, they lived in a supernatural world. Everyone in that time believed in the supernatural. So, and they all lived very close to each other. So it would be weird if there was no similarities. But it's the differences
Exactly.
that mean everything. In fact, in The Lost World of Genesis 1 by John H. Walton, he says the texts serve as sources of information for us to formulate and shape the shape of each culture's ways of thinking. In most areas, there is more similarity between Israel and its neighbors than there is between Israel and our 21st century Western world. As another example, even though today we believe in one God, the God of Israel, and therefore share with them this basic element of faith, the views of deity in the ancient world served as the context for Israel's understanding of deity. It is true that the God of the Bible is far different from the gods of the ancient cultures, but Israel understood its God in reference to what others around them believed. When they did a compare and contrast, it showed how different Yahweh was. And they knew the difference based on what they saw around them. A good Old Testament case, the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is thoroughly an Egyptian thing. We see it on reliefs on the walls of ancient Kemet, and we see them using the Ark. So we have an Ark too, which makes sense. They were 400 somewhat years in Egypt. Yeah, there's going to be some similarity. They're there. But what's the difference? When they used the ark, what was on top of the ark? An idol. They were carrying that idol. When Israel had an ark, who was on top of their ark? No one. Huge theological points. Their God could not be encased in marble and stone. He was not a contingent being. That's the theological point being made every time Israel carried the ark into battle. That's what they were showing the whole world. Our God is not contingent. He is the true God. He is the creator. He is vastly different. How we know? Look at how we carry this ark. So, I'm just saying. I'm saying. It's like there's a, contextualizing isn't plagiarism. It's polemics, and it's polemics and contextualization. It's not plagiarism. We're not saying we're just the same. Like what you said, Apologist Detroit, we're using the language of that audience to convey the message. And we do, and listen, us as the UA, we do it all the time. We do
Everybody
our
does.
thumbnails, our metaphors. Me and you, we talked about client and patron, right?
Patronage, yeah.
Patronage. Who I had in my thumbnail? I had Ghostface Killer, Supreme Clientele. I'm contextualizing. That dude has nothing to do with the gospel. But you know what I'm saying, because if you're from that generation, you know Supreme Clientele, you know the terminology, you know what I'm trying to convey.
Exactly.
I've had the Bee Gees on a thumbnail. I've just all sorts of different pop references. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, I'm liable to spring out in the lyrics at any given moment.
That's true. That's true.
because I recognize that
right.
High context speaks to our conscious, and it's an easy way to associate and to trigger memories. So next time you hear that pop cultural iconic line in a song, you might trigger you thinking about what we were talking about in our videos. So
MJ has automatic recall of Black movie classics. Total recall. Like he'll give you like the first scene from Juice, like right now, like pow. You know what I mean? Like it's amazing. But why does he do that? To convey the message to a particular audience. And where did we learn that from? Jesus. He would use these piffy little stories that we now call what? Parables? And Paul was a follower, so guess what Paul did? He did that too. Why? Because he wants to be all things to all men so that he can save some.
There you
That's
go.
right.
Contextualization right there.
So,
there's your apologetic method, everybody.
Yeah. So and just to you could literally go through both the Old Testament and the New Testament and find these contextualizations and you can make the same assumption. You can assume that they're doing the same thing and that there's nothing unique or special about what the Israelites are doing or what the Jews in the New Testament are doing, or you can rightly recognize that within the narrative you can see that they themselves are comparing and contrasting. They themselves are acting in subversive ways in light of their convictions, which they're expressing in their stories. They themselves are critiquing through polemics, and they're saying, oh, your God isn't El. Our God is the King God. Our God is El.
Our God's the cloud rider, not your
our
God.
God's the cloud. Exactly. Our God's the cloud rider. That's what they're saying. And so, same things going on. I mean, you see it very clearly in the way that the New Testament authors parallels Jesus with Caesar. It's all over the place in the New Testament.
All right, Mark 1:1.
So in that vein, the question is, was Caesar a real person? And when Caesar made similar claims, what was the intention of Caesar's claim, and what was the expectation by his audience based on the claim that he was making? Did it have real meaning? Did it have substantive meaning? Even if it wasn't true, did it have substantive meaning? Or was it just myth? Was Caesar just saying something that he himself really didn't believe? No, Caesar believed he was divine. Jesus believed he was divine too. Jesus just actually was divine, and Caesar went to the grave and ain't nobody see him no more. Jesus, there was over 500 people saw Jesus at the same time. And again, I know you mentioned in your video how some dude not long after the death of Caesar thought he saw Caesar. Well, the people who actually saw Jesus, it altered the course of their lives. Those people put their necks on the line in an empire that was known for its cruelty. The word excruciating comes from the method of which they got rid of people that they didn't like, that were problematic in their society. Crucifixion. The people, it's a lot easier for me to believe a person who stands to gain nothing. They're not going to gain wealth. You can gain wealth and celebrity today following Jesus in America. You ain't going to gain no wealth and celebrity in the Roman Empire. As a matter of fact, you're going to get exactly the opposite, because by the time that we even talking about the stuff that we're talking about, not long after this 50 AD period where Paul is standing before Galileo, roughly 10, 15 years later, Christianity, being a Jew Christian in particular, is outlawed, and being a Christian is effectively outlawed, and you running for your life, you hiding for your life. You don't want people to know you're a Christian. And yet there's 300 years until Christianity became legal again, of Christians stating their case and arguing their case. Some of which, like Justin Martyr is an example of, the reality is he's 100 years removed. While he might get some things right, he, like us today, we 2,000 years removed. We're going to get some things wrong, right, but we can also get some things right. None of us are infallible. None of us are claiming to
Justin
be infallible.
Is not an inspired writer. He's not an inspired writer.
You probably shouldn't, just like you probably shouldn't build a case for some of our commentary on what's actually going on in the scriptures. You probably shouldn't do that about Justin Martyr. I think we're quite safe. We're quite safe doing that when it comes to Paul and the writers of the New Testament, because of A, their eyewitness testimony, B, their eyewitness based on their proximity to the actual events, as well as their fluency and acclamation to the actual cultural way that they're actually communicating, contextualization that they're actually communicating. It's a lot more plausible and probable that what they're telling us we can accept for what it is, particularly when they're saying, hey, what I mean is literal resurrection, because if it didn't happen, we wasted our time.
Right.
So, I just don't get how you can see a statement like that and be dismissive. Just dismiss, right. That doesn't make any sense to me. And claim that the guy 100 years later who's saying it's a myth, that guy knew what he was talking about. That guy that said that if he didn't die from the grave, we wasted our time. That guy, he's saying something different than what we think he's saying. That doesn't make any sense.
Good stuff. So, gentlemen, we're definitely past the hour mark. So definitely want to wrap things up. MJ, please give us your final thoughts on the video.
All right. In this video, we didn't hear his criteria for determining what's myth and what's historical. Never heard it. And, that's where a historian really makes their case in laying out a pretty good criteria for how we go about assessing these matters. Once again, just like in the past, we've been told to try to focus on the similarities and ignore the differences. We have underestimated the time in which myth builds. We just largely ignored that. I submit to the audience that the gentleman's hypothesis cannot account for all of the elements within the life of Jesus Christ. He can't account for the Gospels, can't account for Papias, who knew the daughters of Philip, who was a disciple of Jesus. Papias informs us as to who Matthew was and what he wrote. Papias informs us who Mark and Luke was. All these, you got all this extra biblical data confirming a lot of things. And so when you have a hypothesis, you're looking for explanatory scope, explanatory power, plausibility. Is it less ad hoc, and does it illumine? Does it provide more information on Jesus? So I'm just saying we didn't get anything. This was largely reverse evangelism, if you ask me.
Wow, that was rough. That was rough right there. That's nice. So yeah, guys. So I mean, of course, we did comment on the whole video. I mean, there's just so much to really pick apart. But yeah, you know, it's funny, right? I feel like as apologists, we just need to be out there more, because it's the same argument being just revamped and remixed time and time again. I almost feel like, man, we're not being heard. You know, it's like I feel like we need to be out there more aggressive, debunking these things, so that people don't even think about using these arguments anymore. You know, so, but yeah, that's about it, guys. Apologists in Detroit, I will give you the final word before we are out of here, since this is your fault that we're doing this anyway. So,
in the words of the great American poet Lassane Crooks, they planted seeds in your hat, spark into flame, and they hatch, spark into flame inside your mind. Such a dirty game. Bad thinking. The whole point of that quote there is, you know, bad thinking gonna produce bad results. You know, when you take a step back, you listen, and I think that if you do a compare and contrast of what they're advocating for and what we push back on and stated today, you're going to realize, okay, while you might not argue neither one of us are 100% true, one of them is much more reasonable. One of them makes much more sense. One of them, if this was a court of law, I think you could actually get a one of them you could get a conviction on, and the other one, I think, you know, at the very best is inconclusive. So you know, pay attention. You know, listen critically, listen to people who support it and people who are against it, and use your brain, make and see for yourself.
amen. With that being said, MJ, Apologist in Detroit, and BK signing off. Peace.